Welcome to another edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'm your host, Gazette Hawkeyes reporter John Steppe. I'm excited to welcome back to the podcast Sean Bock from 24/7. Sean, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, John, thank you for having me. I think this was around I can't remember exactly what the last time you had me on was, but I think it was around this time too. Maybe it was in February. I can't remember.
Well, this is an interesting time of year. We had the early signing period last week, got portal in full force this week. So let's first start with the early signing period, which really is the main signing period at this point. But 15 scholarship guys signed, two preferred walk-ons. Obviously not the biggest class, but it seems like there's a lot to like in terms of the guys that the Hawkeyes did sign.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a solid class, and I think you start at the top with five-star defensive lineman Yossi Epinesa. Obviously, everyone's familiar with that name, but he is a guy that can potentially come in and make an instant impact for the Hawkeyes, and really find himself in the rotation next season. I think he's thicker than AJ was. Like he's more of a stronger build, and not as long as AJ was, but I think he's still pushing around like 6'4", somewhere around there. You can kind of move him around a little bit on the defensive line. And, he's going to be a really good piece for next year because I think there are some spots on this defensive line for Iowa that they might be missing. And I think Epinesa can really fill in some of those roles with what he has. And Tyler Barnes mentioned last week, too. I think it was last week. I don't know. Everything's kind of gelling together here. But he mentioned last week that he really wishes he was the guy that could be enrolling early because then he'd be a surefire candidate to, maybe even play in that maybe second edge spot or second, interior lineman spot. It's going to be fascinating to see how they kind of move him around and where they kind of put him. So it starts at the top with him, and then you have a wide receiver in Terrence Smith, the 4-star, another guy who's not early enrolling, but a guy who, it's a position of need for Iowa. Yes, there's some young talent in that room, but you need more production. I think Smith, adds another element to that room with his size and his athleticism and along with his speed. And I mean, the basketball background too. I think he also ran like a 4.5 40-yard dash on his second time at a camp recently. But, anytime you get a wide receiver that has that basketball background and is a guy that can, throw down dunks, run the floor, and is really smooth on the basketball court, you're going to take a chance on him. And I think that's something that Iowa has with Smith. And, I think he's more raw at this point, but you can really add him to the receiver room with that talent. And I think it might take him a year, but, you never know. It kind of depends on what Iowa does in the portal window. Then a few other positions, too. I mean, linebacker Carson Cooney and Burke Gotcher, those are two guys, two 4-star guys that the Iowa staff really likes. I mean, you think about what Seth Wallace is doing with that linebacker room. I mean, that 2024 class with those Eastern Iowa guys, Preston Reese, Derek Weiskopf, and Cam Buffington. That's a really solid group of five that you got there. And, you're kind of in a new era in the linebacker room with Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson leaving. So you bring, those two guys in, the three guys you already have in the program. I think the future is really bright at that position. Then tight end, they went pretty tight end heavy with Thomas Meyer, Mason Woods, Eli Johnson. Thomas Meyer and Eli are more of your traditional tight ends, but Mason Woods could probably be that H-back type or that guy, kind of a smaller or like a receiver too. I think he's like 6'2", 220 pounds, kind of a thicker receiver, but he's got great ball skills, can play outside. He's got to be learned to be a little more physical. So I think that's something that, if he can improve on, he could maybe step into that, Hayden Large type role, except more of a receiver type instead of a blocker. And the last guy I'll highlight is Jimmy Sullivan. I think, a lot of people are really intrigued about what Jimmy Sullivan can bring to Iowa City. He's the first high school quarterback for Iowa to early enroll since I think Alex Padilla did in that 2019 class. I know Spencer Petras did in 2018. But, Iowa, the hit rate with high school quarterbacks has not necessarily been high in the last couple of years. And,
No.
especially during the Brian Ferentz regime as the offensive coordinator. And, obviously there were more factors that go into it too, but you look at that list and it's kind of crazy. So yeah, I mean, Jimmy Sullivan, he's another early enrollee guy, a guy who's not going to blow you away with his measurables. I think he lacks some physical traits, but, he puts the ball in a good spot. He can make tough throws. He can make throws on the run. He's mobile. He can run that like RPO style. Yes, he committed before Tim Lester took the offensive coordinator job at Iowa, but I think he's a really perfect fit for Tim Lester and what he wants to do. I mean, he's got good footwork. He makes good reads. He's a smart player. Like I said, you can use him in RPOs. Like there's a lot that you can work with there. And obviously, like I said, the physical traits aren't there, but there's there. I think getting him early and getting him developed is going to be a really positive thing for Iowa because he strikes me as a guy in the last couple cycles that I feel like is more of a sure thing than the other quarterbacks that Iowa has had in the last couple of cycles. I mean, you look back the last 3 years, I thought Marco Linez would maybe hit, but maybe it just kind of the system change didn't really work out for him or whatnot. But I think Jimmy has all the tools to, potentially really make an impact in Iowa City and potentially, kind of play his way into one of those starting roles. Maybe not, his second year on campus, but maybe compete. I mean, the quarterback room is like the most ever changing room in college football, especially in Iowa City. It's felt like too. So, you never really know who's going to be in it year to year. But I think Jimmy might be the first for Iowa in a while that they feel, or since Petrus, but I mean, that still feels like forever ago, that they can, get in through the high school ranks and eventually evolve into, a starting quarterback in Iowa City. They bring in Ryan Fitzgerald too, as well, the former Northwestern head coach, Pat Fitzgerald's son. Ryan's more of a, athlete at the quarterback position, I think. I mean, he's made some quick throws and, can make some good reads from the high school ranks, but I think Sullivan has more of the proven, arm at this rate. I think Fitzgerald, I mean, you talk about changing the quarterback room. It feels like Tim Lester's really doing that, really putting the focus on it, which I mean is much needed.
Oh yeah, you look at it and everybody except for Jimmy Sullivan committed. Everyone who's going to be in the 2025 quarterback room who will have signed under Tim Lester, and in every case except for Jimmy Sullivan committed. And that's the other thing too, even with Jimmy Sullivan, where he commits before Tim Lester gets there, but he stayed committed under Lester and signed ultimately under Lester. The interesting thing going back to Smith was I thought Tyler Barnes had a really interesting quote about him last week when he said if you were 30 minutes east in Chicago, a little bit closer, he probably would have had 25 offers. How he didn't get more offers is kind of crazy to me. End quote. That's the type of thing that you want to hear on on
Yeah.
signing day if you're a Hawkeye fan.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I'm from that area. I'm not from West Aurora, but I'm from the Chicago suburbs and know that area really well. And when you think of West Aurora, you don't really think of footballers, think of football talent. Yes, they had a good year this year, but when I think of Aurora schools, I think of more of like the basketball, like East Aurora, like 10 years ago when they had the gym that they have out there. But that's a totally different conversation. But yeah, Terrence is a really good athlete. I mean, he was one of those guys that I think, obviously basketball was his first love and, he wanted to play basketball. That's kind of what he was looking for. I think he plays on an Adidas sponsored AAU team. He plays for one of the sponsored like shoe teams, in the AAU ranks and, is a really good hooper and has some, D1 guys on his team. And he looks like he belongs on the basketball court. And I think once you translate that to the football field and, you get him in the development and you get him in the weight room, put some more size on him, there's a lot of tools that you can unlock there. I think he's going to be a really valuable piece. And yeah, I mean, I'm amazed at like schools like Illinois and even like um, Illinois, like Northwestern, like some of those schools didn't, take a chance on him. I know there were a couple of schools that, followed him on Twitter. I think Georgia stopped by his school in the fall, but I think that was more just kind of to check in and, kind of, visit. There were a few other schools that were poking around for a bit, but yeah, it's kind of incredible that he didn't have more. And, Minnesota, I know they haven't really had the best passing offense in the last couple of years, but they've had pretty good success, more recently with some of the receivers like Terrence Smith. So yeah, it was a really good win for Iowa. You look at that receiver room, obviously, people have been wanting more X receivers for like the longest time. I don't remember which season it was, might have been 2022, 2023, where Iowa just felt like I think it was last season, 2023, where they just felt like they had a bunch of speed guys. Now you look at the room, it's like, oh, well, we have a bunch of just tall guys. Freeze Vandersee, Jerry Bowie, Dayton Howard. potentially Terrence Smith, you know, I mean, assuming Caden Weekend comes back, obviously you have Jacob Gill too, but he's more of your guy that you can move around a bit. Now you got to get some speed in there. So I'm interested to see what they kind of go with in the transfer portal. Because, I mean, do they add more speed at the receiver position? What do they kind of value there? Obviously, you go on personnel, but, as Barnes mentioned, he wants some of that speed too.
And I think that's a great segue then into the other aspect of the interesting part of December with the portal. It seems like portal needs quarterback, defensive line, defensive back, wide receiver would be probably, if I had to rank them right off the top of my head, that would probably be what my top four would be.
Wait, say that again. So you said quarterback?
Quarterback. Let's see, what order did I go in there? Okay, quarterback, defensive line. Then I would probably put three and four would be close, I think, between DB and then wide receiver. I would lean toward, but I think those are probably interchangeable.
Yeah, I think you got to get two quarterbacks. Obviously, he looks really good for Hank Brown from Auburn right now. They're
Hmm.
still looking at a few more and kind of going to see what's what there. At defensive line, they have Langdon Kitchen visiting the Northwest Missouri State transfer. He's on campus today. He would be a really good gift for them. Obviously, they have Jonah Pace coming in this week too from Central Michigan, big body guy, more of a rotational spot. Obviously, if you get Ethan Hurkett and Aaron Graves back, like that is huge. Like retention is still really big in college football. Obviously, we saw it last year, last offseason with Iowa. Um, Defensive back, you need to get a corner. I think you need to get a corner. A wide receiver, yes, I think you want one, but would it be the end of the world if you don't get one? I don't know. That's still an interesting one to me.
And then you look at offensive line with Logan Jones coming back. I think that probably solves, you don't need a center now necessarily because of that, but tackle probably seems like a position that, if you could get somebody in the portal, that'd be nice. But also, you don't have 8 million tackles who could immediately be contributors on a Big Ten offensive line in the portal right now either.
Yeah, I mean, assuming you get Jennings Dunker back, I still think that you have to go with an offensive tackle in the portal. But to like what level can you get? That's kind of the big thing. Like I don't think Iowa is going to go and get a Caden Proctor type, and obviously that still has probably a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. But you got to get a guy that maybe can provide depth, or maybe even you have to get one that can push for a starting spot. Because right now, you look at, I think you can move Jennings Dunker over to left tackle. I think that would probably be a better spot for him right now. Um, at that right tackle spot, based on the depth chart, you have Jack Dossler, Trevor Lauk, and maybe Will Nolan and maybe Camden Leonard. I don't know. Like that's still like a big question mark for this team and for this offensive line. I know, there's been a lot of really positive talks about what George Barnett has done with this unit and what how he's kind of been able to take this unit up a bit and the young guys that he has there. But it's still kind of like a really uncertainty, especially at that other tackle spot. So, depending on what you can get, I think you gotta look into it. It's not like a huge need, but I think it's gonna be a really big question mark going into next season for sure.
And then the other position, and this might be more so a high school recruiting thing more than portal, is kicker, considering that, had obviously a very good kicker committed and then flipped shortly before signing day. And you'd like to have somebody else post Drew Stevens other than just Trip Woody.
Yeah, I think you got to get a portal kicker, and I think you got to get a high school kicker too. I think you got to get both of them. Um, Obviously, it's gonna be tough to get scholarships for both of them, especially with the 105 stuff, and you want to clear as much possible for the portal and with scholarships there because I haven't looked at the scholarship chart today, but I think you have like 7 or 8 scholarships remaining, so it's getting kind of tight. And there's still cuts like too with the going down to 105 with the revenue sharing. So it's a tricky slope, but yeah, I think for kicker you got to go high school and you got to go college for sure. to what extent, I don't know, like who they're kind of looking at right now. Obviously, they had a kicker from Indiana on campus for a visit for the Nebraska game, but he'd probably be more of a developmental guy. They like what the improvement at Trip Woody. That's a positive sight. I mean, because he really struggled earlier in his career when he early enrolled, but you got to get another guy too, I think, in there as well. Preferably a guy with more experience.
Yeah, and as you were mentioning with the 105, that's kind of the interesting wrinkle through all this too, is that okay, you're trying to fix all of these, we've got the laundry list of positional needs. That'd be great to get an upgrade at. But they have to do this all when last year they had 131 players on the roster, and this year they got to go down to 105. So when you're doing a 26 fewer guys, granted, most of that is a cut in walk-ons. They'll still have 85 scholarship guys, but still that makes it makes the calculus for a lot of these roster adjustments a little more difficult because you still have to have two long snappers on the team. You still need to have two punters. So
Right.
you kind of do the math, and there are only so many spots really to work with here.
Yeah, and I mean it's guys too that, Iowa prides itself on being a developmental program. Like, and obviously we know the history of what walk-on success has been like in Iowa City. Um, so I mean that you're losing that aspect too. Like, I mean, you'll still get some, but you won't get as many of those stories. And it's tough too, because like I said, like you recruit these guys, like some of these guys that they recruit in the 2023, 2024 classes, they've like kind of been going down that path of being, potential walk-ons to make an impact. And now it's just like, nope, like, sorry, like, we got to cut you. Like, obviously there's more that goes into it than that, but it's just like it's a tough thing to do. And yeah, Tyler Barnes mentioned it too with like going into the depth thing, how, like, what happens if you get a bunch of injuries in spring ball? Like, how are you going to be able to practice? Like, you need more bodies out there. So it's a tough situation to be in. It's annoying. I mean, there's so many different ways that, the NCAA probably could have changed it and could have combated it. But it's just, yeah, it's a tough, I get why they did it, but it's really just hurts, those guys that, are on the outside looking in for sure.
And even if they just phase this in where, okay, it's going to be 115 or 120 in the
Right.
first year and then 105, that makes it a
Yeah.
little bit easier. Because the other thing that we haven't mentioned either is that Iowa only added two preferred walk-ons on
Yeah.
signing day. And, there usually would be another eight or so guys who would have opportunities there. And a lot of those eight or so guys have been really productive when you think about a lot of the success stories, whether it be, Quinn Schulte, Joe Evans, Caden Weechin, you can kind of go down the list of really successful walk-ons that they've had. And you've got a lot fewer of those opportunities now.
Yeah, and I mean, I know it's a smaller margin or it's a smaller group too, but there's still guys that have COVID years coming back. Like, there's still that. So like that probably takes away, like, not just on this team, but I mean maybe even like 5 spots or something. Like, it's a frustrating thing for sure for, that group of walk-ons and just anyone in college football. It's tough.
Well, Sean, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, John, thank you for having me. I wish we could have talked longer, but obviously this is a crazy time. I feel like my brain is going in like 20 different directions right now. But it's fun. It's the new era of college football, and a lot of people are interested in it, so I can't complain about that.
Yeah, 2 more weeks of portal stuff, roughly. Well, it'll drag on a little longer in the portal window
Yeah,
closes. So three or
yeah.
four more weeks, and then can finally catch our breath. So,
Hopefully, yeah, hopefully.
and thanks to our listeners for tuning into another episode. Until next time, we will talk Hawks later.